Welcome to This Explainer. Look, we've all been there, staring down a blinking cursor, feeling completely paralyzed. It's the worst, right? Well, today, we're going to absolutely demystify the writing process. We're digging into the fascinating cognitive science behind writer's block, and more importantly, we're bringing you some scientifically proven, historically backed strategies to help you finally beat it.
So why does staring at a blank page feel so incredibly exhausting? Let's dive right into this because I really want to validate your struggle here. It's not just intimidating, and you're definitely not just being lazy. Writing is scientifically proven to be a cognitively exhausting task. It completely drains your brain power. But hey, understanding exactly why that happens is your very first step to making it easier. Here's our roadmap for deconstructing this whole process step by step. First, we'll look at the cognitive load of writing, then move into brainstorming and divergent ideation, unlocking your voice through free writing, visualizing with mind maps, and finally, we'll wrap up with convergent synthesis and outlining.
All right, let's jump into part one, the cognitive load of writing, the actual brain mechanics of composition. To really diagnose the problem, we need to look at writing as this massive negotiation of constraints. The Flower-Hayes cognitive process theory tells us that writing is this intricate, constant dance of planning your ideas, translating them into text, and then reviewing them.
But why do we freeze up during that dance? Well, that's where John Sweller's cognitive load theory comes into play. The big takeaway here is that your working memory has a strictly finite capacity. It's limited. So when you try to pull up knowledge, perfectly structure an argument, and make sure your spelling is totally flawless all at the exact same time, you just overload that limited working memory.
It's basically a math equation. Your total cognitive load equals the intrinsic load, so how hard the subject matter actually is, plus the extraneous load, which is the drag caused by disorganization, plus the germane load, which is the mental effort it takes to build those new concepts in your head. If you add those three up and they exceed your working memory's limit, boom, your brain just shuts down.
And that shutdown is exactly what we call writer's block. It happens because we have a total conflict of goals. We let those low-level goals, sweating over a misplaced comma or a typo, pick a fight with our high-level goals, like making a coherent argument and actually engaging the audience. It creates a literal mental traffic jam.
Which brings us to part two, brainstorming and divergent ideation, expanding the raw material. Since we know the problem is a mental traffic jam, the very first cure is expanding our raw material by totally suspending our inner critic. We've got to focus on just generating ideas without judging them right out of the gate. It really boils down to two entirely different mindsets. Divergent ideation is all about opening up, going for massive volume, turning off the filter, and suspending criticism. Convergent synthesis, on the other hand, is about organizing and narrowing things down into specific arguments. Listen, the absolute fastest way to fail at writing is trying to be divergent and convergent at the exact same time. It just doesn't work.
As the legendary 1950s advertising exec Alex Osborne once said, "It is easier to tone down a wild idea than to think up a new one." That quote perfectly captures the whole philosophy here. It is infinitely easier to take a wild, massive concept and scale it back than to just sit there, staring at the screen, trying to force a perfectly formed, brilliant idea to pop out of thin air.
Osborne actually formalized 4 foundational rules for classical brainstorming, and honestly, they completely revolutionized corporate ideation. Here's the playbook. You focus on maximum quantity. You completely withhold all criticism. You enthusiastically welcome the absolute wildest ideas you can come up with, and then you combine and improve upon them.
Now, fast forward to today, and you don't even need a boardroom full of coworkers to pull this off. Modern AI tools, things like Microsoft Copilot, Grammarly, or ChatGPT, basically act as your own personal on-demand brainstorming partners. They simulate Osborne's divergent techniques and can massively accelerate your idea generation right at your desk, saving you hours of that awful blank page anxiety.
Moving right along to part three, unlocking voice through free writing, bypassing the inner censor. This is another phenomenal divergent strategy. It was heavily popularized by writing teachers Peter Elbow and Natalie Goldberg, and it's specifically designed to radically separate your creative phase from your highly critical editing phase.
Elbow hit the nail on the head when he said, "Compulsive, premature editing is the primary obstacle to fluid writing." Seriously, if you're trying to fix your spelling or find that one absolutely perfect word choice while you're still just trying to figure out what you want to say in the first place, you are guaranteeing the death of your natural writing voice. So how do we bypass that? By executing a true stream of consciousness free write. But you have to be super strict about the rules. Set a timer for 10 minutes and just write. Do not stop, do not look back, ignore grammar entirely. And if you get totally blocked, literally just type, "I don't know what to write" over and over again.
Yeah, it feels kind of silly, but the goal here is pure raw momentum.
Now, obviously, a pure free write produces a giant mess. To actually turn that mess into something usable, we use a technique called looping. You look back over your messy output, circle one really interesting phrase, and then use that single phrase as the prompt for your next free write. If you loop that process 3 to 5 times, you'll organically funnel all those broad, scattered thoughts into a super sharp, highly specific argument.
Okay, let's pivot to part 4, visualizing with mind maps, spatial organization, and radiant thinking. If free writing is about finding your voice, mind mapping is about drastically lowering your working memory load by letting you actually see your ideas laid out geographically.
This brings us to Tony Buzan and his fascinating concept of radiant thinking. Buzan argued that human thought just isn't linear. It doesn't work like a boring, lined piece of notebook paper. It's highly associative, it's multidimensional, and it perfectly mirrors the physical branching neuronal networks right inside our brains.
Because of that, Buzan had some pretty strict laws for mind mapping to make sure you create a vibrant, spatial map. You always start with a colorful central image to anchor your focus, then you draw organic, curved branches because straight lines are literally boring to your brain, and you use strictly one keyword per branch. It essentially builds a visual memory palace that fires up both hemispheres of your brain.
And there's hard data to back this up. A 2005 study by Trevino showed exactly why separating your visual map view from your linear outline view speeds up the drafting process so much. When you map it out visually first, you're figuring out the structure and connections without stressing over syntax. Then, when you finally move to an outline, your brain only has to focus on translation and grammar.
Which brings us right to our final step, Part 5, Convergent Synthesis and Outlining, Structuring the Chaos. We've officially reached the convergent phase. This is where we gather up all those brainstormed, free-written, and visually mapped ideas and lock them down into a tight, logical architecture. It's time to bring order to all that chaos.
But before you just start typing out an outline, expert writers use systematic questioning to really grill their own topics. They use techniques like starbursting, firing off the who, what, where, when, why, and how, or Kenneth Burke's dramatistic pentad. Doing this ensures your argument is completely watertight. It helps you catch any research gaps before you even start drafting so you don't hit a wall halfway through your piece. And hey, an outline doesn't have to just be a bunch of stuffy Roman numerals. You've got a whole menu of structures to choose from. You can tailor it perfectly to the vibe and formality of your project. Writing a serious business plan? You're going to want a highly formal full-sentence outline. Banging out a quick blog post? A super informal scratch outline works absolutely perfectly.
But whatever format you go with, a true formal outline relies on a couple of really strict logical rules. First, the rule of coordination. Ideas with equal weight need the exact same indentation. And second, the rule of division. If you divide a point, you absolutely must have at least 2 subpoints. Meaning, if you have an A, you gotta have a B. It's a simple check to guarantee your argument stays perfectly balanced.
So, by understanding the cognitive limits and mechanics of your own brain, you are officially no longer at the mercy of writer's block. You've got a comprehensive, scientifically backed toolkit right at your fingertips. The only question is, which divergent or convergent technique are you going to deploy the next time you face down that dreaded blinking cursor? Happy writing, and thanks for joining us for this explainer.